Hi everyone, I'm Jack Fremling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. We are in week 3 of Sagalong 2023, and the saga of King Hrolf Kraki continues to be thoroughly enjoyable. I'm astonished at how much I'm enjoying this short saga. There's this incredible fusion of the myth and the deep past with its supernatural occurrences and the frankly superhuman feats that we're seeing. But there are these ethical concerns, these characterizations that push forward, that the writer of the saga or the singers of the oral tradition really felt were important within these stories. Yes, we have all these adventures, but we have these ethical concerns. We have these ideas around family, around community. What are the choices that a person makes? What is it that's heroic about a person and that is worth singing about? Is it strictly the violence and the great feats, or is there something else? And that's something that becomes very explicit in this week's reading. So I'm just really enjoying it. So let's jump in. We had left off with this idea that King Hrolf has sort of been established now as a noble king. He's a little bit more authoritative. He's specifically more generous than his peer kings in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, that area of Scandinavia. But we're told in chapter 17, it is said that to the north in Norway, a king named Hring ruled over Uppdalus. He had a son named Bjorn. It is told that the queen died, and the king and many others found this a great loss. And there's a desire for King Hring to remarry. But we're told at the end of this chapter, after he does, he marries Svit. At this time, the king was getting on in years, and the effects of his age were soon apparent in the queen's behavior. From there, we jumped to his son Bjorn, who is in love with a freeman's daughter, Bera. And there are ways in which the saga writer tells about the love between Bera and Bjorn, and it really is the sweetest love that we've seen yet in the saga. And we have seen some doozies of marriages. We've already had one between a parent and child unwittingly. We've seen various marriages that were essentially betrayals. There hasn't necessarily been a huge amount of love, or when there has been love, it has led immediately to violence. And here we have this really kind relationship. There's a class difference between them, but it's not explicit for them. It's not explicit in their relationship. It's not a big deal. And there's something that feels very distinctly modern there. And it's something that perhaps would have continued to feel relevant and modern in Iceland when this was being written, because there were interesting marital traditions in Iceland, ideas that would seem, I think, progressive to modern ideas, modern audiences. So that feels relevant. But the fact that King Hring is too old, essentially he's unable to make love to Queen Hvit, is going to be important. And that's a theme that has persisted in literature and in myth and in tradition for millennia. It is a central theme in the story and the tragedy of Hippolytus by Euripides. It is a key point in the life of Joseph and the relationship he has with Potiphar's wife and his refusal and the consequences there. It is something that was mentioned in the Corinthians in the New Testament, and it's something Freud was obsessed with. And so this idea was something that is sort of a more subtle theme in Shakespeare's Hamlet. This idea is, again, explicit here because we're told that Queen Hvit loves her stepson Bjorn. And so she says, hey, let him stay and rule with me while you go off on this year's adventures. And she then tells Bjorn, you should lay with me, keep me warm. No one will know. The king is gone. This is what I desire. I need a man like you. You're the heir apparent. Take this as part of taking the kingdom. And that was something that had been important in the book of 2 Samuel in the Old Testament. When David's son Absalom rebelled, one of the acts he did was to go and spend time with his father's concubines as a way of essentially establishing his right. And there had been this long link between a king's virility and not just his strength to defend a kingdom, but the actual health of the kingdom, the way that the livestock grow, the way that the crops produce. It was something that was relevant to the Fisher King in the Grail tradition. And so our saga writer is tapping into all of those currents and making it now a little more personal because we care about Bjorn. We know that he isn't just spurning Queen Hvit because he thinks it's appropriate. He really does love Bera. And so we have a curse. She then struck him with her wolfskin gloves, telling him to become a cave bear, grim and savage. You will eat no food other than your own father's livestock, and in feeding yourself you will kill more than has ever been observed before. You will never be released from the spell, and your awareness of this disgrace will be more dreadful to you than no remembrance at all. And there's something very poetic about that specifically this is a curse to turn him into a bear. When we've already heard in this saga and in other sagas that there are the berserkers, the bear shirts, the men who as warriors become like bears and are unstoppable in battle. And so she's cursing Bjorn to become a berserker, but to become something even more eldritch, more strange than that. And so we have this bear that ravages the livestock. And Bera notices that there's something human in the eyes. And so she follows the bear to its cave and realizes that at night he becomes Bjorn again. The queen, of course, tells the king that he must slay this bear and send all of his men and his hounds after it. And so Bjorn and Bera have this discussion. He says, they are going to kill me when I become a bear. This is my last night. You are pregnant with 3 sons. Don't eat the bear meat. Demand this ring that, this will be the ring that proves that your child will be my child and the heir to the kingdom. And so this all occurs. The queen forces Bera to eat a bite of meat, and then she chews on a bit of a second bite, but doesn't have any more after that. And so when her children are born, of course, we have one who is half man, half deer, elk Frodi. We have one who is mostly man, except when you get to the bottom of his feet at the instep, he's got the feet of a hound. And then there's the third son, who's just normal, Bodvar. And there's something interesting there with the 3 there, the way that elements of 3 were prevalent in Icelandic sagas and in Norse culture with the 3 Norns and such. But now we see what happens with these sons. Each of them receives a little bit of inheritance, and he receives a weapon. And Frodi is furious. He gets this little sword, and he's aggressive and violent. He goes off and just becomes this highwayman robber, almost like a troll. The second son goes, and he gets an axe. He gets a little more wealth, and he goes and establishes himself as a kingdom because he's a big man. And then Bodvar comes along, and Bodvar avenges his father. He destroys Queen Fit, his step-grandmother, I guess, at this point. The king is sad about all of this and ultimately dies, and so Bodvar is now the king. And so as he goes, he meets his own brother. And Frodi is quite aggressive, as this has been established. But Bodvar, curiously, the brothers, when they go to meet each other, they wear hoods so that they can't be known. And it's interesting because one of the motifs of a number of Icelandic sagas is that Odin will disguise himself and wear a hood. And we'll see Odin, or someone pretending to be Odin, later on in this saga. And so that element is interesting. But the conversation between Frodi and Bodvar is interesting because Frodi has seemed to be the least human of the brothers. He's the most aggressive. He's the one who's the most violent. He doesn't seem to fit in as a king or have any culture. Each is a king in his own way, but Frodi's is over this little hut and maybe a mountainside and a bit of a highway. Thorir has a little bit of space, a smaller petty kingdom, and Bodvar has, the rightful throne. And it's interesting as well that Bodvar is the youngest son, sort of a parallel of Joseph there. But Bodvar and Frodi push at each other, but from now on you will be, Frodi gives his brother a drink of blood from his calf that will make Bodvar stronger. He kind of pushes him and he says, you're not strong enough. He has him drink some blood, this idea that by drinking the blood, Bodvar has consumed part of the essence. And he pushes him and goes, now you're strong enough. You're exceedingly strong, kinsman. I believe the drink has been of use to you. From now on, you will be ahead of most men in strength and prowess, as well as in courage and nobility. This thought pleases me immensely. Next, Frodi stamped on the stone that lay nearby. His leg sank into the rock up to the small nub on the back of the leg, above the elk hoof. He said, I will come to this hoof print every day in order to see what is in it. It will be earth if you have died of sickness, water if you have drowned, but blood if you have been killed by weapons. If it is the last, then I will avenge you, because I love you best of all men. And there's something about Bodvar that suggests that there is, despite the violent destruction of Hvit, there's something about him that seems to conjure the most noble characteristics of those he encounters. That Frodi has been this violent highwayman and now is pledging to avenge his brother, who he was willing to fight earlier. He seems to have this effect. And so as he makes his way to King Hrolf's court, he hears about a man who has showed up and was basically beaten and abused and thrown against the wall, and his sort of built up, as he describes, a shield wall of bones around him because people just throw bones at him all the time. And this seems to be an occurrence that would have occurred at any feast, that there would have been a food fight involving bones, and if someone threw it hard enough, they could get hurt or even die. And so this man has constructed a parody of a shield wall. He's almost like a jester of a weak warrior, and he's all dirty and gross. And so there's this aspect of almost the Christian idea of baptism, and how Bodvar takes Hot and he takes him out and he rescues him, he washes him clean, and he says, you sit with me now. And when people want to threaten you, they threaten me, and I'm going to fight them, and I can take them. And King Hrolf, he notices this, but gradually Bodvar teaches Hot to be a warrior. They go and they kill this monster, this troll. And he has Hot drink some of the blood to become stronger. And so later on, Hrolf recognizes and he says, I knew when you came here that few would be your equal, but it seems to me that your finest achievement is that you have made Hot into another champion. He was previously thought to be a man in whom there was little probability of much luck. I do not want him called Hot any longer. Instead, from now on, he will be called Hjalti. You will now be called after the sword Golden Hilt, that sacred sword that we heard about earlier in the saga. And so there's something fascinating and beautiful there in that Bodvar's value is not just that he's the strongest, that he's the toughest, that he can slay all these. It's that he goes and imputes value and lends his own nobility to someone else to make them stronger. He lifts up others. And that's something that even in a medieval saga sounds modern. It's quite beautiful that Bodvar is of value to the community, not just to the king. And there's something quite incredible about that and interesting. And so Bodvar has now persuaded King Hrolf to go recoup his father's land, go back to King Aldous and take what's ours. We'll see how that goes. The champions arrive and we meet this strange farmer who is probably Odin, and not unlike the story of Gideon and the Judges, is going to send part of Hrolf's army home. And then the second time, it's who's thirsty. Okay, the people who are thirsty, they need to go home. The people who couldn't stand sitting too close to my fire, they need to go home. Until now, all that's left are the 12 champions with Hrolf, Bodvar and Hot among them. And so we'll see what happens next week. But this has just been absolute dynamite. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this finishes up. Now, as I mentioned, I thought of a couple of works. I, of course, thought of Hippolytus by Euripides. Great, great tragedy if you've never read it. I certainly thought of Joseph in Egypt by Thomas Mann, from the story of Joseph and his brothers, and the way that Mann explored the relationship between Joseph and Potiphar's wife. I thought of Sophocles, in part the ethical concerns that arise in Antigone and Oedipus at Colonus. So certainly the relationship of Oedipus with his mother. Perhaps the most famous of the taboo parent-child relationships. The Saga of the Volsungs feels important, particularly the idea that the drinking of Fafnir's blood. These are elements of Irish sagas as well. And there are great references to and parallels to Beowulf. Honestly, I am finding this saga to be so much more enjoyable than Beowulf. And when I think of trolls, I of course think of Ibsen with Peer Gynt. And then finally, the ideas around taboo relationships and the ethics that are part of community certainly feel an obsession of Sigmund Freud's. And I had mentioned totem and taboo, but civilization and its discontents would also feel relevant. So let me know if you're enjoying this. Let me know what works you're reminded of, and I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you.